The widow and her children were chased by a giant snake. The lone hunter saved them, but they found something greater. Welcome back to another thrilling story from the American frontier. Today, we're diving deep into the untamed wilderness of the Old West, where a widow and her children face a nightmare beyond imagination. What starts as a deadly chase through the forest becomes something far more sinister, an encounter with forces that predates civilization itself. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick canopy of the Colorado Territory's ancient forest as Sarah Matthews clutched her youngest son, Tommy, against her chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and sweat mixed with tears streaked down her dirt-stained face. Behind her, 8-year-old Lucy struggled to keep pace, her small legs trembling with exhaustion. "Mama, I can't run anymore," Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of breaking branches and rustling leaves that seemed to follow them through the woods. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she glanced back. The sound was getting closer, that horrible, wet, sliding noise that had haunted them for 3 days now. Ever since they'd fled their homestead after witnessing something that defied all reason and sanity. "Just a little further, sweetheart," Sarah whispered back, though she had no idea where they were going. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, and they'd lost the trail 2 days ago. All she knew was that they had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of the thing that hunted them. The attack on their homestead replayed in her mind like a waking nightmare. John had been dead only 2 months, taken by fever, leaving Sarah to manage the farm alone with the children. She'd been hanging laundry when she heard Lucy's scream from the vegetable garden. What she saw when she ran to investigate would be burned into her memory forever. A serpent, but not like any snake God had ever created. It was massive, 30 feet long and as thick as a man's torso. Its scales shimmered with an unnatural iridescence that seemed to shift between deep emerald and pitch black. But it was the eyes that had frozen her blood, ancient, intelligent, and filled with a malevolent hunger that spoke of eons spent in darkness. The creature had been coiled around their milk cow, crushing the life from the poor animal with deliberate, terrible patience. When it noticed Sarah and the children, those awful eyes had fixed on them with predatory interest. Without thinking, Sarah had grabbed the children and run, abandoning everything they owned to escape into the wilderness. Now, 3 days later, the thing still pursued them. It seemed to toy with them, staying just close enough to keep them moving, but never quite catching up. Sarah suspected it was driving them somewhere specific, though where and why remained terrifyingly unclear. A branch snapped loudly behind them, much closer than before. Tommy whimpered against her shoulder, and Sarah felt her strength beginning to fail. They couldn't run much longer. Lucy was stumbling with every step, and Sarah's arms ached from carrying her 2-year-old son. The forest around them seemed to grow darker, the trees pressing closer together, as if the wilderness itself conspired against them. Ancient pines towered overhead, their thick trunks scarred by decades of harsh weather and bearing strange markings that looked almost like symbols carved into the bark. "Mama, look," Lucy pointed ahead with a trembling finger. Through the trees, Sarah could see a clearing bathed in afternoon sunlight. In the center stood the ruins of what might have once been a structure, weathered stone blocks arranged in patterns that hurt her eyes to look at directly. But more importantly, the clearing offered open ground where they might be able to see their pursuer coming. They stumbled into the open space, and Sarah immediately regretted the decision. The stone ruins were wrong somehow, arranged in spirals that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Strange symbols covered every surface, and the very air felt heavy with age and malevolent purpose. Before you continue, if you're enjoying the story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. The sliding sound grew louder, and Sarah spun around to see the massive serpent emerge from the tree line. In the open daylight, it was even more horrifying than she remembered. Its scales seemed to absorb the sunlight, creating an aura of unnatural darkness around its colossal form. The head was easily the size of a wagon wheel, with fangs that gleamed like ivory daggers. But it was the intelligence in those ancient eyes that terrified her most. This wasn't just a beast hunting for food. This was something far older and more dangerous, something that understood exactly what it was doing. The serpent reared up, its massive head swaying hypnotically as it studied them. Sarah pulled both children close, knowing there was nowhere left to run. Lucy sobbed quietly against her mother's side, while Tommy remained eerily silent, his wide eyes fixed on the monster before them. The creature opened its mouth, revealing a throat that seemed to stretch into infinite darkness. A sound emerged, Not quite a hiss, but something that resonated with harmonics that made Sarah's bones ache. It was almost like speech, though in no language she'd ever heard. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed, holding her children tight as the serpent began to move forward. This was how it would end, in this cursed clearing, surrounded by symbols of forgotten horrors. Then she heard the sharp crack of a rifle. The serpent's head snapped back as the bullet struck it between the eyes. Dark ichor sprayed from the wound, and the creature let out a sound that was part roar, part scream. It thrashed wildly, its massive coils destroying small trees as it writhed in pain and rage. From the forest emerged a man unlike any Sarah had ever seen. Tall and lean, with weather-beaten skin and eyes the color of winter ice, he moved with the fluid grace of a natural predator. His long coat was dusty from travel, and an impressive collection of weapons hung from his belt and across his back. But it was the way he carried himself, with absolute confidence and deadly purpose, that marked him as truly dangerous. "Get behind the stones," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the serpent's thrashing. Now, Sarah didn't hesitate. Grabbing both children, she scrambled toward the ancient ruins, seeking whatever protection the weathered stones might offer. The stranger was already working the lever of his rifle, chambering another round as the wounded serpent fixed its terrible gaze on this new threat. The stranger moved like a man who had faced death countless times and emerged victorious. As the massive serpent coiled to strike, he rolled to the side with fluid precision, his rifle tracking the creature's movement. The serpent's strike shattered the earth where he'd been standing, its fangs driving deep into the soil. "Stay down," he shouted to Sarah and the children, who huddled behind the ancient stones. "Don't look directly at its eyes." Sarah pressed Lucy and Tommy deeper into the shadow of the ruins, though she couldn't tear her own gaze away from the deadly dance unfolding before them. The stranger fired again, this shot taking the serpent in the side. Dark blood sprayed across the clearing, but the wound seemed to heal almost immediately, the scales knitting themselves back together. "Son of a bitch," the stranger muttered, ejecting the spent cartridge. "Should have known regular bullets wouldn't work." The serpent lunged again, its massive head striking like lightning. The stranger leaped backward, but not quite fast enough. One of the creature's fangs grazed his shoulder, tearing through his coat and drawing blood. He grimaced but didn't slow down, reaching into his coat to withdraw something that gleamed silver in the afternoon light. Sarah watched in fascination as he quickly began loading his rifle with different ammunition, bullets that seemed to shine with their own inner light. Where he'd acquired such strange projectiles, she couldn't imagine. But there was something about them that made the serpent recoil slightly. "That's right, you bastard," the stranger said, raising his rifle. "You remember these, don't you?" He fired, and this time the effect was dramatically different. The silver bullet struck the serpent's massive head, and where it hit, the scales didn't just part, they burned. A sulphurous smoke rose from the wound, and the creature's scream shook the very ground beneath their feet. The serpent thrashed wildly, its coils smashing against the ancient stones with tremendous force. Sarah felt the ruins shake around them, and she feared the old structure might collapse. But the stones held, their weathered surfaces seeming to absorb the impact. "The stones," the stranger called out, still moving to avoid the serpent's increasingly frantic attacks. "They're warded. The creature can't touch them directly." Sarah didn't understand what he meant by warded, but she was grateful for whatever protection the ancient ruins provided. She watched as the stranger continued his deadly game, using his superior speed and intelligence to stay ahead of the massive predator, while inflicting wound after wound with his strange silver bullets. But even supernatural ammunition had its limits. After his fifth shot, the stranger's rifle clicked empty, and Sarah saw him reach for more cartridges, only to come up empty-handed. The serpent, wounded but far from defeated, sensed the change. Immediately, its massive head swayed back and forth as it studied its opponent, those ancient eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence. Dark ichor dripped from multiple wounds, but they were already beginning to heal. "Well," the stranger said, drawing a long knife from his belt. The blade gleamed with the same silver light as his bullets. "Guess we're doing this the hard way." What happened next defied belief. The man charged directly at the serpent, his silver blade held high. The creature struck like lightning, but somehow the stranger was faster. He slid under the massive head, his knife slashing upward to open a long gash along the serpent's throat. The creature reared back, spraying dark blood across the clearing. Its scream of rage and pain echoed through the forest, sending birds fleeing from the treetops in all directions. But instead of retreating, the stranger pressed his attack, moving with inhuman speed and precision. What followed was a battle unlike anything Sarah had ever witnessed. The stranger seemed to anticipate the serpent's every move, dancing around its massive coils, and striking with surgical precision wherever the creature was most vulnerable. His silver blade left burning wounds that refused to heal, slowly weakening the ancient predator. But the fight was taking its toll on both combatants. The stranger was bleeding from multiple wounds where the serpent's fangs and scales had found their mark. His movements, while still deadly precise, were beginning to slow. The serpent, for its part, was covered in burning silver wounds that leaked dark ichor onto the forest floor. Finally, after what felt like hours, but must have been only minutes, the stranger saw his opening. The serpent, weakened by blood loss and multiple wounds, made a desperate lunge. The stranger sidestepped at the last second and drove his silver blade deep into the creature's skull, just behind its massive eyes. The effect was immediate and final. The serpent's entire body convulsed once, then went rigid. Those terrible ancient eyes glazed over, and the massive creature crashed to the ground with a sound like falling timber. For a long moment, the clearing was silent, except for the stranger's ragged breathing. He stood over the serpent's corpse, his silver blade still embedded in its skull, and Sarah could see that he was swaying slightly on his feet. Is it dead?" Lucy whispered from behind the stones. The stranger looked over at them, and Sarah was startled to see that his winter blue eyes held depths of weariness that spoke of battles fought across decades. "For now," he said simply. He pulled his blade free with some effort, wiping the dark ichor on the grass before sheathing it. Then he walked over to where Sarah and the children huddled behind the ancient ruins. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed quaintly civilized after the violence they'd just witnessed. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Name's Jack Crow. I tracked things like this." Sarah stared at him, struggling to process everything that had just happened. "I'm Sarah Matthews. These are my children, Lucy and Tommy. That thing killed our livestock and chased us from our homestead 3 days ago." Jack's expression grew grim. 3 days. "And it didn't kill you?" He looked back at the serpent's corpse, his brow furrowed with concern. "That's not right. These creatures don't play with their food. If you're still with us, drop a like and let me know in the comments what you think of this story so far." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Jack studied the ancient ruins around them, his experienced eyes taking in details that Sarah had missed. "It was hurting you, driving you here, to this place." He gestured at the weathered stones. "These aren't just ruins, ma'am. This is a threshold." "A threshold to what?" Jack's expression grew even grimmer as he examined the symbols carved into the stones. "Something that was locked away a long time ago, and I'm afraid our friend here," he nodded toward the dead serpent, "was just the gatekeeper." As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, Jack Crow moved methodically around the ancient ruins. He ran his hands over the weathered stones, studying the symbols with the careful attention of a man who had seen such markings before and understood their terrible significance. Sarah watched him work while keeping the children close. Tommy had finally fallen asleep in her arms, exhausted by 3 days of terror and flight. Lucy sat pressed against her mother's side, her young eyes wide as she studied their mysterious rescuer. "Mr. Crow," Sarah said quietly, not wanting to wake Tommy, "what exactly are you?" Jack paused in his examination of a particularly complex symbol, a spiral design that seemed to writhe when viewed from the corner of the eye. "I'm what some folks call a hunter," he said without looking up. "I track things that shouldn't exist, things that slip through cracks in the world, things like that serpent." The serpent was just a servant. Jack's voice was grim as he moved to another section of the ruins. "These symbols, they're a warning, and a lock." He stood up, brushing dirt from his hands, and turned to face Sarah. In the fading light, his weathered features seemed carved from stone. "This place is old, Mrs. Matthews. Older than the tribes that used to hunt these lands. Older than the mountains themselves. It's what my people call a thin place. Somewhere, the barriers between worlds wear away." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the approaching evening. What kind of worlds? Before Jack could answer, the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. It was subtle at first, like the rumble of distant thunder, but it quickly grew stronger. The ancient stones around them started to hum with an almost musical resonance. "Get back," Jack commanded, drawing his silver blade as he positioned himself between Sarah's family and the center of the ruins. "It's starting." The spiral symbols, carved into the stones, began to glow with a sickly green light. The vibration grew stronger, and Sarah could hear something moving beneath the earth. Something vast and ancient stirring from a sleep of centuries. "What's happening?" Lucy whispered, clinging to her mother. Jack's knuckles were white where he gripped his weapon. The serpent's death broke the binding. Without a guardian, the seal is failing. A crack appeared in the ground at the center of the ruins, running between the stones in a perfect spiral pattern. The crack widened, and from its depths rose a sound that was neither animal nor human, a voice that spoke in harmonics that made the bones ache and the mind recoil. "We need to get out of here," Jack said urgently. "Now." But as they turned to flee toward the forest, they found their path blocked. More serpents emerged from the trees, smaller than their fallen guardian but no less deadly. Their scales gleamed with the same unnatural iridescence, and their ancient eyes held the same malevolent intelligence. "The forest is full of them," Sarah breathed, counting at least a dozen of the creatures surrounding the clearing. Jack studied their situation with the calm calculation of a veteran fighter. "They won't attack," he said finally. "Not yet. They're waiting." Waiting for what? The crack in the earth widened further, and something began to emerge. At first, Sarah thought it was another serpent. But as more of the creature rose from the depths, she realized this was something far worse. The thing that pulled itself from the earth was easily 50 feet long, with a body that seemed to be composed of living shadow given form. Its surface rippled and shifted like dark water, and where it touched the ancient stones, they began to crack and crumble. But it was the face that made Sarah's blood freeze. Where the other serpents were clearly reptilian, this creature bore features that were almost human, if humans could exist in the deepest pits of hell. Its eyes burned with an inner fire that spoke of intelligence, vast and alien, and when it opened its mouth to speak, Sarah heard words in a language that predated human civilization. "The Guardian is dead," it said, its voice like grinding stone. "The compact is broken. After 3,000 years, I am free." Jack stepped forward, his silver blade reflecting the sickly green light emanating from the ruins. "Apep," he said, and there was recognition in his voice. "I should have known." The creature's burning eyes fixed on Jack with interest. "A hunter? How? ... Unexpected. It has been many centuries since your kind walked these lands." "The Watchers never forgot," Jack replied. "We've been keeping track of all the old places, all the old locks. Did you really think your imprisonment would go unnoticed forever?" Apep, for that was apparently the creature's name, laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "The Watchers, still playing guardian to a world that has forgotten them. Tell me, hunter, how many of your brotherhood remain?" "A dozen. Less." Jack's expression didn't change, but Sarah caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Whatever the answer was, it wasn't good. "Enough," Jack said simply. "Enough for what?" "To watch, to record, to die gloriously in forgotten battles." A massive form coiled through the ruins, and wherever it touched, the ancient stones turned black and began to crumble. "The age of hiding is over. The old powers are stirring, and this world will remember what it has forgotten." The creature's burning gaze shifted to Sarah and the children. "And these ... witnesses. How convenient. They will serve as the first heralds of the new age." Jack moved faster than seemed humanly possible, placing himself directly between Apep and the family. "You want them, you go through me." Apep's laughter echoed through the clearing again. "One hunter against the serpent of chaos. Even with your silver toys and ancient wards, you are nothing compared to what I have become during my imprisonment." The creature reared up to its full height, its shadow falling across the entire clearing. The smaller serpents began to move closer, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Perhaps," Jack said, reaching into his coat. "But I didn't come here unprepared." He withdrew something that made Apep recoil, a crystalline pendant that pulsed with pure white light. The light seemed to drive back the sickly green glow of the failing seal, and wherever it touched the smaller serpents, they hissed and retreated. "Impossible," Apep breathed. "That crystal was destroyed with the Temple of Heliopolis." "One of them was," Jack agreed. "But the Watchers are thorough. We kept a shard." The pendant's light grew brighter, and Sarah could feel its power washing over them like a cool breeze. Tommy stirred in her arms, and for the first time in days, he smiled. But even as the light pushed back the immediate threat, Sarah could see that it was taking a tremendous toll on Jack. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hand trembled slightly as he held the pendant aloft. "That trinket won't hold me for long," Hunter Apep said, though the creature had retreated to the far edge of the clearing. "And when its power fails, I will show you exactly what 3,000 years of imprisonment has taught me about pain." Jack's smile was grimmer than winter. Good thing I don't plan to hold you that long. He reached into his coat again and withdrew what looked like a bundle of dynamite sticks wrapped with silver wire. But Sarah could see that the sticks weren't normal explosives. They pulsed with the same white light as the pendant. Mrs. Matthews, Jack said, without taking his eyes off Apep. When I tell you to run, you take your children and you head due west. Don't stop, don't look back, and don't slow down until you reach the town of Cedar Falls. What about you? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. I'm going to do what hunters do, Jack replied. I'm going to make sure this thing doesn't follow you. The white light from Jack's pendant continued to push back the encroaching darkness, but Sarah could see the strain it was putting on him. Sweat ran down his face in rivulets, and his breathing had become labored. Whatever power the crystal contained, it was demanding a price. Apep watched from the edge of the clearing, its burning eyes fixed on Jack with patient malevolence. You cannot maintain that ward forever, Hunter, and when it fails, Jack interrupted. You're going to discover what happens when someone tries to break a 3,000-year-old seal with high-grade alchemical explosives. He held up the bundle of modified dynamite, and the silver wire wrapped around it began to glow with increasing intensity. The smaller serpents, sensing the danger, began to retreat into the forest. But Apep remained, its massive form coiled among the crumbling ruins. You would destroy yourself, along with me? The ancient creature asked, and for the first time there was uncertainty in its voice. If that's what it takes. Jack's voice was steady, but Sarah could see the toll the pendant was taking on him. His hand shook slightly as he maintained his grip on the crystal. Mrs. Matthews, it's time to go. Sarah hesitated, looking between Jack and the path to the forest. Come with us. There has to be another way. Jack's smile was sad but determined. There's always another way, ma'am. But not always a better one. Take your children and run. Don't make my sacrifice meaningless. Before Sarah could respond, Apep made its move. The ancient creature lunged forward with incredible speed, its massive coils smashing through the weakened ruins as it sought to reach Jack before he could trigger his explosives. But Jack was ready. As Apep closed the distance, he threw the pendant to Sarah. Catch! Sarah instinctively reached out and caught the crystal, and immediately she felt its power flowing through her. The white light blazed brighter than ever, and Apep's charge faltered as the pure radiance washed over the clearing. Run! Jack shouted, igniting the fuse on his explosive bundle. The pendant will protect you, but only for a short time. Sarah didn't hesitate any longer. Clutching Tommy against her chest and grabbing Lucy's hand, she sprinted toward the western edge of the clearing. Behind her, she could hear Apep's roar of rage as the creature realized what was happening. They reached the tree line just as Jack's explosives detonated. The blast was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. It wasn't just the thunderous roar of conventional explosives. There was something else mixed in, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. The light was so bright it turned night into day for a brief, impossible moment. And the shockwave knocked Sarah and the children to the ground. When the light faded and the ringing in her ears subsided, Sarah looked back to see a crater where the ancient ruins had stood. The twisted remains of the spiral stones lay scattered around the edges, their symbols dark and lifeless. Of Jack Crow and the creature called Apep, there was no sign. If you've made it this far in the story, please hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments below. Is the bad man gone? Lucy whispered, her voice small and frightened. Sarah looked down at the pendant in her hand. Its light had dimmed considerably, but it still pulsed with a warm, reassuring glow. Yes, sweetheart, the bad man is gone. They walked through the night, guided by the pendant's light and Jack's final instructions. The forest seemed different, now less threatening, more like a normal wilderness rather than something actively malevolent. Birds sang in the trees, and small animals rustled through the underbrush, sounds that had been absent during their 3-day nightmare. As dawn broke over the mountains, they emerged from the forest to see the town of Cedar Falls spread out. In the valley below, smoke rose from chimneys, and Sarah could see people beginning their daily routines. It looked wonderfully, impossibly normal. They made their way down to the town, where the sheriff, a kind man named Williams, listened to their story with the patient skepticism of someone who had heard too many tall tales. But when Sarah showed him the pendant, still glowing faintly, in her palm, his expression grew serious. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "there are some folks you need to talk to. Folks who'll understand what you've been through." He led them to a small house on the outskirts of town, where an elderly woman named Martha lived alone. But when Sheriff Williams explained why they'd come, Martha's eyes sharpened with sudden interest. "Show me," she said simply. Sarah held out the pendant, and Martha's weathered hands trembled as she recognized it. "I haven't seen one of these in 40 years, she whispered. "Not since my grandfather passed." "You met one of the Watchers." Over the next several hours, Martha explained things that Sarah had never imagined. The Watchers were an ancient organization, dedicated to monitoring and containing threats that existed beyond normal understanding. They had safe houses and resources scattered across the frontier, and they took care of their own, even the families of fallen hunters. "Jack Crow was a good man," Martha said as she prepared a room for Sarah and the children. "His grandfather was a friend of my family. He knew the risks when he took up the calling." "Is he really dead?" Sarah asked. Martha was quiet for a long moment, studying the pendant that now rested on her kitchen table. "The pendant survived," she said finally. "That means something of him survived too. The Watchers have ways of coming back from things that would kill normal men. But it might be years before he's strong enough to take physical form again." Sarah thought about Jack's sacrifice, about the way he'd faced certain death to save her family. "What happens now?" "Now you have a choice," Martha said. "The Watchers will provide for you and your children. They'll give you new identities, a new life, somewhere safe. Or ... or..." Martha's eyes gleamed with something that might have been mischief. "Or you could learn to use that pendant properly. Apep wasn't the only old thing locked away in forgotten places, and the seals are weakening everywhere. The Watchers could use someone with your experience." Sarah looked at her children, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days, then at the pendant, still glowing softly on the table. She thought about Jack Crow and his winter blue eyes, about the way he'd faced impossible odds to protect people he'd never met. "Tell me more about the Watchers," she said. Martha smiled, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the young woman she must have been. Someone who had once faced her own impossible choices and chosen to stand against the darkness. "Pour yourself some coffee," Martha said. "We're going to be here for a while." As the sun set over Cedar Falls, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Matthews began to learn about a world she'd never known existed. A world where ancient evils stirred in forgotten places, where brave men and women stood watch against threats beyond imagination, and where sometimes sacrifice was the only way to keep the light burning. The pendant pulsed gently on the table. Between them and Sarah could have sworn she heard Jack Crow's voice carried on the evening wind. "The choice is yours, ma'am. But remember, there's always another way." Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the distance, something howled, a sound that spoke of old hungers and older hunts. The world was full of wonders and terrors, in equal measure, and Sarah Matthews was beginning to understand that she'd been given the chance to help determine which would ultimately prevail. The story of the widow and her children was over. The story of Sarah Matthews, Watcher, was just beginning. And there you have it, the tale of Sarah Matthews and Jack Crow, and their encounter with ancient forces in the untamed wilderness of the Old West. What did you think of this story? Which part was your favorite? The deadly chase through the forest, Jack's battle with the giant serpent, or Sarah's choice at the end? Leave a comment below and let me know. I love hearing your thoughts, and I try to respond to as many comments as possible. Did this story remind you of any legends or folklore you've heard? The idea of ancient evils locked away in forgotten places appears in cultures all around the world, and the American frontier was full of mysterious locations that early settlers couldn't quite explain. If you enjoyed this Wild West tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. We've got more adventures from the frontier coming soon, including tales of cursed gold mines, phantom riders, and the strange things that happened when civilization meets the untamed wilderness. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.